It's a sleeping pill. So, no.
You're going on YouTube, so
All right. Hey guys, how you doing?
we're talking about insomnia.
Yeah.
If you were wondering, Scott and I both. Cha- uh, Sleep can be a challenge. We'll say
Yes.
that. All
Yeah.
right. Hello, YouTube. I'm about to put us out here on social media feeds, and then we'll get the podcast rolling, and we'll talk about all things that you guys want to talk about. Hawkeye wise. All right. Blue Sky, Twitter. Let's start up the podcast. Hello there, and welcome to the Hawk Fanatic Hawkeye Hotspot podcast here on hawkfanatic.com. That's a lot of Hawkeye and Hawk Fanatic and all that stuff. It's Friday, January the 24th, 9:20 a.m. Central Time. I am Rob Howe, joined by Scott Docterman from The Athletic. Thanks for joining us. How are things, Scott? What's going on with you? How's life?
It's not too bad. Everything's going okay. It's been busy now that the college football season is complete. Had a nice championship game, I thought the other day, two northern teams. The ratings weren't as high as I think people wanted or expected. I think that is indicative of why I said that they need to move everything back a week or so in college football land, which is start the season a week earlier on the week 0, make it week 1, have the championship weekend be Thanksgiving weekend, the
So
playoffs
that
immediately.
if you started 2 weeks early, that would give you another week separation from the NFL starting, right? You
Mhm.
would have 2 weeks before the NFL starts.
Yeah, if you add in the week 0 week as
Yeah,
week 1, then that would give you two games before you get to what yeah, because Labor Day weekend would be your second weekend.
yeah.
And the NFL doesn't play Labor Day weekend. They play the Thursday after Labor Day.
So
So that
that would
would
be
give you
beneficial. You get two games with no competition.
exactly. And then if you move, and my suggestion was, and in my 10-point plan for how to readjust the offseason, including the portal and everything like that, is you can, if you want to stage a championship game or something like it, have it the week after Thanksgiving or the
Conference
week,
ship.
yeah, conference, have it Thanksgiving weekend. And then the next week is when you start the playoffs, where traditionally we're now the first weekend in December where you have the championship
Yeah.
weekend. And then the second weekend or the second playoff round would be what the first round was this year, which would be the third week of December. Then the semifinals would be New Year's Day. And then championship games should be on a Thursday or Friday, not a Monday. Because what I noticed and what I've noticed every year is that it gets swamped by the NFL discussion over the playoff games. That, you start talking about, oh, well, we got Josh Allen playing Patrick Mahomes next week, and you know, Buffalo beat Baltimore, and then, oh, by the way, Notre Dame's playing Ohio State for the championship. It needs to get out of that
And you've got
discussion.
the NFL coaching, hiring, and firing that takes up a lot of bandwidth when it comes to media coverage.
Exactly. So, college football is the second most popular sport in the country based on ratings and notice it, but it's clearly number 2. It's not number 1. The NFL is number 1, and you could probably leave number 2 blank. It's that big, and so college football needs to kind of get out of its own way, and I think that would be the way to do it, which would mean like for the Big Ten, there's two options I threw out there, and I know we're going completely opposite of what we talked about to begin with, and I
No,
apologize.
we're fine. That's this
Yeah,
this podcast is just free
yeah,
form.
yeah. And anyway, it's like say Iowa, Nebraska would play the Saturday before Thanksgiving. The next week, the Big Ten could do a couple of options, that I threw out there. One is championship game. Or if you don't want to have a championship game, then okay, well, then we're going to play a regular season week with no championship game. The other option, and this is kind of a cool thought, is you leave the last week blank and call it like a matchup week, and then you have and the league decides who plays who, and it could be playoff beneficial. So let's say, this year maybe it's the same scenario with Oregon playing Penn State and India, or something like that, but then maybe it's like, well, let's have Iowa play Michigan, and in the last game, and Champions Week, which is what they tried to do that
Yeah,
COVID
yeah.
year. You could have something like that. You could make it just regular season. But to me, I think what this season has shown me is that when you have teams, both of them, both the participants played all 4 playoff rounds. Luckily, they didn't have to play a championship game for them. But if you would have had Penn State, for instance, in the championship, that's a lot of football to ask them to play. You might want to remove one of those weeks. And that could be incorporating a champions week as part of the regular season, eliminating the championship game altogether, or play it as is. But either way, all of it end Thanksgiving weekend, and then build the season back up to closer to New Year's Day as the conclusion.
Yeah, and obviously the portal windows seem wonky too, and they need to
Mm,
figure that out
yeah.
around what they're doing with the playoffs. It's to make it as, I guess, um, equitable for everybody that's
Mhm.
involved, teams that are playing, teams that aren't playing. Because now it's just it just seems very disorganized, which really is odd when you think about the NCAA and its ability to govern and keep all this
Yeah.
stuff
Yeah.
lined up.
It's been so well run all these years, and very streamlined and
Yeah.
non-bureaucratic. Now a couple of things I threw out there, and I'll repost this sometime today, is that with the portal right now, when you have it right after the championship weekend, and then you have signing day in the middle of championship week, you're basically asking your coaches who are in their most important time of their year, playing for a conference championship, getting ready for the playoffs, to be completely consumed by player acquisition at the same time. Their brains are going to be stretched so thin that you're going to see stress panic attacks by some of these coaches, and I don't blame them.
And
Uh,
it can impact performance and
Absolutely.
competitiveness. It probably will, likely will.
Yeah. I mean, if God forbid you lose a championship game, and then all of a sudden you realize that half your team's going to enter the portal,
Yeah.
or something like that. So what I threw out there, and this is, and I've seen some feedback that some people like it, is, for one, let's look at like freshman recruiting. Take it 2 periods. One is like, make it a period, not just a date. And that would be like August 1 through the middle of October. You can sign anytime with your team then. So that way it's fluid. It's not just this, and like most of the kids that commit know where they're going to go. They're going to sign on August 1st. Boom. Some other ones, man, I want to take a visit during the season. I want to see how things are going. And then eliminate the December signing, because that way by mid-October you should know, A, if you're going to enroll early or not, and B, it gives you enough time to really decide where you want to go. I mean, and you don't need to take it all the way down and use the hat trick and all that. Second signing would be, if you don't know and you're not going to enroll early, February, like we used to have, the traditional date. So then that removes it from the postseason, and it
Yeah.
removes it from the portal. The other ideas that I had was move spring football from where it is today to June, and then replace it with mini camps in March and April. And how that interacts with the portal is, the portal then would go to January. Now, the players that wouldn't enroll, aren't going to be moving to their new team. Their former teams have to allow them opportunity to continue. They still compete with the strength and conditioning staff, but they have a separate staff. So if there's like 8 guys who are at the portal, they're going to leave. Your staff still has to train them. And then secondly, when you have those mini camps, you're allowed to allow everybody, signees, portal guys, to come in and pay for their transportation to come in. So if I, let's say Mark Gronowski or whatever, he's still at South Dakota State. Well, you can fly him in, house him, and he could participate. And then all the injuries that incur over an extended playoff, and how many times, Rob, do we see in the spring where, well, he's out, he's got a shoulder he had worked on, and blah blah blah, but he'll be
Yeah.
ready by June. Well, June is when it's important, So there's a lot there. I threw a lot out there and completely off the cuff, but I
No,
have
that's you. And I kind of skimmed through that story and we'll go back and read it a little closer. But yeah, it's, there's obviously areas that can be improved in this. And, had we joked about the NCAA's ineptitude, but really this is a recovery from that,
Mhm.
from pushing it all the way to the Supreme Court. And instead of being proactive and having a system set up that works for everybody, now we're just going to go Harry Carry here and just
Mhm.
try to put things back together. And that's
Right.
what they're having to do because, of course, it's the
Yeah.
NCAA. And why be proactive when you can
Yeah.
be reactive? And that's the MO for them.
Well, exactly. It's everything that we've discussed for years now, Rob.
Yes.
And it goes to me, the tipping line was when Jim Delaney said we're going to pay up to the full cost of attendance instead
Yeah.
of just the scholarship. And people freaked out like, well, Iowa's going to be able to pay $2,800 more than you and I. And I'm thinking, unless your parent is on the coaching staff, you're going to go to Iowa over you and I anyway.
Right.
It's just the way it is. Or, well, Texas, their cost of living is $5,000. So, and I'm like, kids are not that shallow. They're not going to pick someplace because I get an extra $1,000 a year,
Yeah.
$100,000 a year, absolutely. But
And that's what we're seeing.
yeah, right, $100,000, or
A
more. Well, a lot of cases more.
lot more.
Yeah, a lot more. But then you also look at the stuff with like Shabazz Napier.
Hmm.
I go to bed hungry at night and all that, and all of a sudden you're looking at the NCAA policy and you're thinking, you can't have 2 meals a day, you can't provide them, and then the whole dumb stuff with like whether you have cream cheese on a bagel versus a bagel, and just the arcane laws on whether you can feed or rules that they can feed them or not. And when Kane Coulter tried to unionize and all of that stuff bubbled up, and it's like
Women's
anybody.
the women's basketball
Oh,
inequities at the
oh
tournament.
yeah, yeah. During COVID, that was
Yeah.
horrible. But when you look back at 10 years ago, when all that stuff started
Yes.
permeating, that's when it was time to make the change. That was the time to flip the switch. Let's do this. We can't wait 10 years to do this. Because then you started having the lawsuits take
Yep.
place and stuff. Should have been taken care of 10 years ago. O'Bannon, with the name, image, and likeness off video games, all that stuff. And instead, no, 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 fight it all the way to the Supreme Court, lose in the most polarized Supreme Court in United States history, 9-0. Now you're fighting, now you're just trying to figure out something that works that's not going to get you sued. And they keep getting sued and they keep losing because they're trying to create something. And now we've got utter chaos in every aspect of NCAA sports. And hopefully the House case is resolved and amicably. But as we know, last week there was guidance from that suggested that no, the money's got to be dispersed according to Title IX guidelines. Um, when I talked to an AD, that AD was like, we expect things to change on Monday. So they
Yeah.
don't, and so here we are, but that rule still applies at least until it gets rescinded. So you've got all kinds of things that are
Well,
under.
what's going on now, Scott, is the NCAA has opened up the floodgates for litigation, and
Yeah,
you just have attorneys, lawyers. You see them all over Twitter. I retweet them sometimes.
yeah.
Just they're looking for every angle, every
Mhm.
slip up, every hole, loophole that the NCAA has left open is going to be attacked.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, and you look at the house settlement finances. I
Yep.
mean, and this was what I was asking from day one, and nobody had a clear answer, which was, are you going to pay it according to marketability, or are you
Yeah.
going to pay it based on gender equity? And everybody's like, I don't know, and there was a fear that that's a Title IX lawsuit waiting to happen if you pay it according to marketability. But then it's like, well, how is this going to solve anything if we pay it that way? Because when you look at um, if I'm a football guy at Iowa supporter, why would I give to the school when all I want to do is give to football? And if it's going to be split 10-10, 10 million to women's athletes, 10 million to men's, I'm going to give to the collective that's going to provide it for the football
Right.
program. So you got all this stuff here, and it's I expect. I mean, it's going to go marketability. It just is. I mean, it's going to go to court. It's going to end up probably in the Supreme Court, but is it going to fall under the Title IX equal opportunity? And I think how it'll end up being adjudicated, and this is just my prediction, I'm not an attorney, is that the Supreme Court will rule that, well, you don't pay football coaches the same amount as field hockey coaches. So therefore, this is the area that this applies when you're talking about compensation. You provide them with the equal opportunity, equal resources for their sport to compete. But I don't think that, again, how much are you going to pay? You're going to pay everybody the same amount. You're going to pay football play. I don't even know what that would come down to, but I mean, they're going to cut about 100 athletes at Iowa because of the rules anyway. But I mean, what is it, 20 million? I guess I could do the math, but I'd have to get my calculator out. 500 athletes, roughly 20 million bucks. I mean, that's let me see here.
I wish I could help. The math at this hour, at any hour, is not good for me.
You're just going to pay everybody $40,000. You're going to pay the long distance runner the same as the quarterback. You do that, good luck. Or you're going to divide it and then let them decide within the 10 million for here, 10 million for there. Okay, you're going to have a lot of rich women's basketball players, and then you're going to have a lot of women's track athletes who are going to make a ton more than men's track athletes. Because if you're going to say 10 million go to men's basketball and football, 9.5 million is going to go to men's basketball and football, and 500,000 are going to go to the other sports. So it's a mess. It's been a mess for a long time. It's a mess that everybody could see coming. And here we are. And I just blew 15 to 20 minutes of our time on
No,
this
I think this is a good conversation because I think we're going to spin this to the Iowa angle now. And this is, again, my concern because I look at it from an Iowa angle as well as I know you do from, macro to micro because you live here. But as I follow along with all this, I'm thinking, okay, 2, 3 months ago, 4 or 5 months ago, I'm thinking this thing will be in place for the 25-26 school year. As we keep crawling along here, I begin to wonder if it's going to happen and everything is going to be in place by the time the 25-26 school year comes along. And if it doesn't get into place and we continue to roll along like we are, how well can Iowa compete in the landscape that it is in right now? Well, I mean, Gronowski's a big part of it. If he comes and he's a hit, then you're like, okay, we're healthy. If he isn't and you get some form of Cade 2.0, then it continues to hamper Iowa. Whereas the playing field would be more equitable and even if the House settlement comes through for Iowa.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, part of his setup is basically a half and half right now, which
Right.
is the collective takes care of the front half and then the school takes care of the back half after July 1st. But then if July 1st thing doesn't work out the way you wanted it to, then you're kind of in a tough situation. And um, so, that to me is fascinating from an Iowa angle. If you're looking at men's basketball, for instance, the appetite for giving for to collective based for men's basketball is not very strong right now. However, through the school can make it more streamlined and say, men's basketball, you have this much, football, you have this much. And there's no wavering. And that we've talked about it before about whether it's transparency, that's one thing, but also they put so much on fans to be to help and help and help. Well, you're asking too much, when you're saying that they've got to fund all the athletes when they've been funding the athletic department for years, and the athletic department's trying to figure out what to spend all our money on.
Yeah, they
And
got all the new media rights deal, and they're not having to give any of that to the student athletes right now.
yeah,
They're still asking the fans to pay. It's not sustainable.
right. And Beth wants a complete renovation of Carver Hawkeye Arena, which makes sense, but again, and it divides your fan base to the point where I won't say all older fans are this way, but a lot of them aren't necessarily comfortable. They don't understand the NIL rules. They don't know how to give. They don't want to give to anything but Iowa.
I
So,
think the Caden Proctor case was a
oh yeah,
really good example, an illustration of the misconceptions that come along with NIL and giving to collectives.
yeah, exactly. I mean, he's a poster child for, well, I'm not giving to that. Look what
Yeah.
he did. And whereas if you have it through the athletic department, they can decide. You just give like a blanket check, I'm given to the athletic department. Then the athletic department can funnel it through it any way they want to, which is, well, what they're going to do. That is the way that makes the most sense. It's just, but again, if you have your Iowa fan retiree who gives money to the athletic department, and let's say it's
They get a scholarship. I had to pay for college.
yeah, exactly. You can think that all you want, but that's not going to help you beat
No.
XYZ PDQ. It's not, so uh, you've got to have money and you got to have funding for your players. Otherwise, you're dead in the water in any sport. And that just gets you on the playing field. That doesn't mean you're going to convert a third down or you're going to hit free throws in the final 2 minutes of your game. So, I mean,
Yeah.
there's just a lot. It's complicated. It's detailed. It's deep. It's probably in some cases makes you feel icky thinking about it, but it's the way it is. And at this point, at least you're not concerned about the bag man. I mean, nobody from the school 4 hours east is getting the best player of all time for a blazer and $75,000 below the counter.
Yeah.
Now it's all here. Hey, here you go.
Yeah. Yeah. It is fascinating. And those of us that have a little longer in the tooth look back. I mean, if you really think about where things stand right now compared to history and conversations and beliefs and all the things that have changed just in this decade so much compared to what has happened previously, it's startling.
Yeah.
And that's why this is so complicated. And from an Iowa perspective, in regards to this conversation, pay attention. Just pay attention to what's going on in the courts and legally and things like that, because that will give you that will give you insight into where your favorite teams, your programs stand on the landscape, because it benefits Iowa if this House settlement goes through. If we continue with the Wild West, it makes the slope a lot slipperier for Iowa. So that's kind of your rooting interest in this, if you will.
Right. Because what Iowa's biggest benefit and problem is it has a wide pool of people who love Iowa and contribute. We see it 70,000 at Kinnick, to the I Club, to how much money that they generate in private donations every year. It's really good and it's really strong. Problem is, it's not, and this is a problem in some situations right now, and it's a good thing across the board that they don't have 5 people that are throwing down
T-Boone
8
Pickens.
Yeah,
They
you
don't
don't
have
have
T-Boone Pickens.
they don't have T Boone. Iowa State has the heavy donors.
Yeah.
Iowa State has some major money, Dennis Albaugh and some of those
Yep.
people. Iowa doesn't quite have that. If you get it under the wing of the athletic department, I mean, Beth Getz has already said she's paying up to the limit, and that's good. That's a great start for
Yep.
Iowa. Get that taken care of. And then you use the muscle and then the machine that is Iowa's revenue generation within it, and donors. to make it work financially. But then if you've got to rely on the outside world, then that's when you've got to rely on nickels and dimes, and everybody else has got quarters and dollars. And that's your nickels and dimes add up, but it's a lot more. You got a lot
Yeah.
more change, and then you're at the whims of the performances of your teams, whether and sometimes it's win loss. Oh, I'm not giving anymore. To somebody not playing well, to the coach, you don't like the coach. So you really need it to be all internal. So then it's, hey, we have as much of a chance as anybody else in the league, based on the money we're providing as an institution for these athletes. And then internally you can decide how it's allocated. You
Yep.
could, if you could say, well, we care, like let's say the third male sport. At Iowa, it's wrestling. At Minnesota, it's ice hockey. And it's like, you've got to make those cutthroat decisions. We're going to provide more resources, more finances, because we expect to be a national title contender in wrestling every year. And Minnesota feels the same way about ice hockey. But then when it comes to baseball, that's where you're probably going to struggle. And it's unfortunate. And it's a capitalistic reality. And, whereas same thing with women's basketball versus volleyball. Nebraska might say, we're going to make this pretty even, maybe a little more for volleyball. Iowa's like, we're throwing everything at women's basketball. That's really important for us. And doesn't mean you can't win. It just means you get that choice. And that's healthy for each campus to make that decision.
Yeah, it goes back to the conversation we had, whatever, 4 or 5 years ago about divvying up the pie and who gets what and who gets, there's only so much in the pie. So there's only so much to go around. And this is still the process of trying to figure out who gets what. And it's eventually we'll get to a conclusion, but it doesn't seem like it's near.
Yeah.
So we'll find out how it goes. And obviously it impacts Iowa. Probably a good time to take our break here. We're going to come back and dive heavy into men's basketball, which is the topic of the week and the winner so far here in Hawkeye land. So I think we should dedicate some time to that, and we will. But first, have to let you know that support for the podcast comes from Systems Unlimited, celebrating 50 years of providing services to people living with disabilities and mental health needs throughout East Central Iowa. A list of their services and upcoming events can be found at sui.org. That is sui.org. We're going to hear from a few more sponsors right now. Scott and I will be back on the other side to talk some men's hoops. Hang tight. And we're back on the Hotspot podcast to let you know that switching is easy. We do it all the time. We switch on the lights, we switch TV channels. Some of us switch partners while square dancing. Well, that's a stretch, but what's not a stretch is how you can switch and save with State Farm. In fact, State Farm agent Chad Birch right here in Iowa can switch you over so you can start saving today. Chad and his team are ready to welcome you to the State Farm neighborhood. With Chad Birch, it's easy to switch and save. Just give him a call when you want the real deal. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Black Angel Restaurant, downtown Iowa City. Perez Brothers, owned and operated, formerly of El Banditos and Perez Tacos right here in Iowa City. Check them out. Black Angel Restaurant, downtown Iowa City. You will not be disappointed. There are some disappointed people as in regards to the Iowa men's basketball program, Scott. It's, yeah, I think back, and we've talked about this on this podcast too, the days of good call and talking about people leaving games early and going up to the concourse and watching games. Well, there were actually people in the stands then to do that, and we were complaining about that, and other fans were complaining about that. Now You were there the other night, Tuesday night for the home loss against Minnesota. And I was watching on TV. I've got some things going on at work right now that I won't share yet, but kept me away. But did watch on TV. We'll watch on TV again tonight when they play Penn State. I wouldn't expect a big crowd tonight either. Tuesdays and Fridays suck. Same nights as high school basketball. Don't like that. But if you go back to the before the commercials that we just ran, we just went through about half an hour of why it's a business, and it is a business, and that's going to play heavily into this conversation because I think there are a lot of layers to it, but I don't think there's any question if you've been to Iowa men's basketball this season that something needs to be done. What that is, I think a lot of people have opinions. It's not black and white, cut and dry. There again are a lot of components to this. So I won't throw it to you, Scott, and just say what needs to be done because that's again very deep. Uh, but you would agree that something needs to be done. Um, do you have a path forward here? Do you have a starting point to what needs to be done here?
I think you got to start all the way back to the very beginning of what is the problem. Get to the root and then deal with the reality, the pros and the cons, and then try to figure out how you can make this work in the future. The root of the problem, as we know, it really stems from Tom Davis's departure. Now, people have revisionist history about this. You were at the Press Citizen. I was in Muscatine. I watched the program my whole life. Tom's, for a 10-year block, after his second Sweet 16 in a row, they did not advance to the Sweet 16. They'd win a game in the tournament, and then they lose. There was some NIT years in there. It was fairly stagnant. They win 20 games, they get to the tournament, they win their first round, and then lose the second. Now, a lot of times they were unlucky in their draws.
Or 7, 8,
Yeah,
9 seeds where
yeah,
it's a toss up.
exactly. And they were playing Duke or they were playing
Yeah.
Kentucky. And then, the horrific tragedy that was the Chris Street accident, that was probably his best Tom Davis team that he recruited, that
Yep.
he had all together. And that could have been not only a Sweet 16 team, but maybe beyond. All that being said, and then you lose Rafe LaFrance. That was the one, like, I'm going to be old guy here. It was like Ivan Drago getting popped by Rocky and he's bleeding. That's what really kind of changed the tenor and tone around the program back then. Like, how could you miss on this guy?
Yep.
And when you're, again, kind of flatlined, which means you're a good team, you're a good program. They had a couple of losing seasons too. They were like 11 and 16 one of those years after the first wave of Marble and Horton and all those guys.
No, the year
Then,
before the last year was
yeah,
NIT.
NIT, and they got annihilated by Georgia. I was there at that one too, and it was just like, and I wrote about it, and I talked to Bob Bowlesby and just a couple of years ago about it, just to kind of now looking back, what do you think? And he's like, we had a lot of donors that were really upset, that felt like we were just stagnant, that we needed to make a change, that we needed to get better as a program. And you looked at the recruiting and you looked at all these other aspects, and they were kind of in that ballpark. And then you had the lame duck year for Tom Davis.
Yeah.
And their win against Kansas on the road helped them get to be a number 5 seed, because you look at their overall record during that year, wasn't great. It was good. They were like, what, 9 and 7 in the Big Ten.
That sounds right.
They got in and they won a 4-5 game. So it got them to the Sweet 16. And I am not taking anything away from it, because it's the last time that I was been in the Sweet 16. It was a gritty, tough, hard-nosed team. They had some good players, some good shooters, Kent McCausland, near the top. And then, but that kind of fractured the fan base, because there was a group of people who really liked Tom Davis, and they weren't necessarily, they wanted to get to the next level, but they wanted to get to the next level with Tom. And I would equate that relationship comparable to Kirk in some ways, where there's the critical mass was still kind of in his corner. And then, but hey, Steve Alford, the hot young coach, we saw him play at Indiana. He's leading Southwest Missouri State to a Sweet 16. You got the hot young guy. And then, of course, what we know and what we talked about and what we don't want to really revisit is all that era. That I think the Pierre Pierce, Steve Alford turnoff trimmed probably 25 to 30% of the fan base to going from being passionate and very interested to casual. Is that fair?
I think it's fair. And I also think a component of that is the people that will never come back because of what happened.
Yeah.
And I don't blame them at all.
Yeah.
But that was going on 20 years ago or 20 years ago.
20 plus years ago now. Yeah. The
so
second one was this 20 years ago.
What have you done in the last 20 years to replace those fans that checked out and build your fan base back up? Well, you were there the other night. I've been there to games this season. I don't think anything's been done to grow the fan base.
Nothing. And that's institutional. And I could blame Fran, and I will. I think he's a major part of it, but I also will say it's institutional in that even from Alford, in the 06 season, when they won the Big Ten tournament, they were number 2 by one game from winning the Big Ten championship and got to be a number 3 seed. That the numbers weren't great, as great as people want to say that they were, try to remember that they weren't all that great for attendance, and they were not that great for finances.
If you remember that season, a lot of that attendance was backloaded. Once that team got hot in the Big Ten, all those games at the back end of the Big Ten season at Carver Hawkeye Arena were packed.
Yeah.
Because earlier in that season, coming off the previous season, I think they lost to Cincinnati? Was that the Cincinnati loss, I think, in the NCAA tournament the year before that?
Yeah.
But there was no momentum going into that season, and that team kind of surprised, kind of like 0-2 football.
Yeah.
And then people were just in a frenzy on that team. But you're right. It was fool's gold.
Right. For the fan base. And then you had the intense letdown. A big lead, you lose as a 3 to a 14. And then you had, a great collection of players that vacated. And you had Haluska left over. And then the next year, they were 17 and 14, didn't make the tournament. Alford leaves. He gets forced out, basically, or he jumps when he saw the arms getting nudged for him. And then
stayed ahead of the posse.
Yeah, exactly. And it made sense. You got to do that. He knew Iowa fans didn't like him. He didn't like anybody. He was, high ego. Gary knew it was kind of a toxic situation. And then Todd comes in and just completely, falls apart. It couldn't have been a worse hire if you would have planted it. If you're Illinois or Iowa State, hey, hire this guy, and it just went. Yeah. So, and I know some people still talk about Fran, giving him credit for what he did to build out of the Licklider crater. I think that's kind of expired in my eyes. That's 15 years ago. Some kids that he's recruiting were 2 or 3 years old when that happened. I think he did a nice job. You give him that 4 to 5 year block and say, yes, you changed the trajectory of the program. But, I look at different era, but Mizzou last year was 0-18 in the SEC, and now they're ranked, so things can change very quickly. I think what has happened in this era, and I'll go with on the court and then I'll go with off the court. On the court, they reached up a high, and there were growth with Utah and Aaron White and Devin Marble, and you got Utah or Woodbury and all those guys, but they never won a really big game. Every time, I remember at home they lose those really close, excruciating games to Michigan State or Ohio State, and it's like the fans wanted to rush the court. They wanted to feel that high, and they didn't get it. And then in the postseason, that year, I think where it kind of started to turn a little bit was the 16 year, where they started 10-1 in the Big Ten, and they were leading and then they finished 2-6 to finish the season. One of them was in the tournament, and the other, and then they got annihilated by Villanova. The fans felt kind of let down. And then you get to the Luca Garza, Keegan Murray, Chris Murray era, Joe Wieskamp, and Jordan Bohannon, and you have a team that gets a number 2 seed and you can't get to the Sweet 16. So, and what's the common element? Defense. It's always the common element here. And so fans that were already, it's like your passion, if you're a cell phone and your passion meter is, you're already at a 79 when you pull the plug, then they're at 53, and then they're like, who cares? I'm not going to get my emotions up for something that's just going to let me down anyway. But then off the floor, how have you managed to make this program exciting, entertaining, and have the fan base wrap their arms around it? They haven't done anything. That's from Fran, and that's from the institution. That's Gary Barta. I'll give Beth kind of a pass to some extent, although this year you got to get, now she needs to own it. But you look at the last 15 to 20 years, other than game today, today we'll give the students free pizza. Well, you got to do more than that. It's like, we got the kiss cam, or we got, put a smile on your face or whatever.
Lift the burrito.
Yeah, you got to pump it up, baby. So it's like, game today, come here. What are you giving? And they don't celebrate their history enough. And now it's history. It's not tradition. It's history. Tradition is what you've maintained. You don't have it anymore. It's all about history. And I know I've talked a lot here, but I think it goes hand in hand. Fran needed to do a better job of building fan engagement. And that's things like, we've talked over time, PTL, you twice a week in the summer for 4 to 6 weeks, you can get 500 fans to North Liberty Rec Center, watching your game. We're going out there, writing stories, shooting videos, TV stations are out there. It starts to build relationships and bonds with the players and the fans, because they can read about it, they can get autographs, they can watch them, they can discuss them. It's at their, shirts and skins. 2.5 hours before kickoff at Carver Hawkeye Arena, a couple thousand fans would mill around, and then they would sit and watch these, pickup games. Again, hey, I saw him play. I really liked his game, blah, blah, blah. Nothing like there. Then you extend it a little farther back. The in-state series. It was something that people talked about because, hey, UNI's got 5 Iowans who a couple played in the Valley, a couple played in the CIML. Iowa's got a few. People paid attention.
You had every other year, you had 2 in-state opponents in your arena, and every year you had at least one. Yeah. Now it's just one every other year.
Right. And what did you do to replace it? Well, you went to the Big Four Classic, which Fran was dragged kicking and screaming into. And
that was not I didn't mind seeing. I would have liked to at least it was something, but it was really just scraps.
Yeah, it wasn't much to it. It's kind of like, okay, when's this thing going to heat up?
Yeah,
it's not, and it didn't. But and then when it got cut, Fran's. I remember asking him specifically about it way back when, and he's like, well, I'm indifferent to it. Well, that's kind of the whole thoughts of what Iowa fans are right now to the basketball program, is they're indifferent to it. But what are you replacing it with? If you dump the PTL, then you should probably do a barnstorming summer situation. Go to Cedar Rapids, rent the 5-season center or whatever it's called now. I don't even know, and have a celebration for men's basketball, or go to West Des Moines at Valley and do the same thing, or wherever. If you're not going to have shirts and skins, then have a black and gold blowout, which they used to do after a football game. They don't have any of that. There's no opportunities for fans to really get to know the team.
And there was a time they even did the Midnight Madness to kick off the season.
On a Friday night before a home football game, you had women's and men's. And I remember, it was fun. It was entertaining. And there were there were a lot of fans that went there. I mean, it was probably half full, which, just as a start was a pretty good thing. And then if you're going to whack the, Drake and you and I off your schedule, then go get somebody else who comes in that gets people energized and interested instead. And then you lose the ACC Big Ten Challenge, which isn't your fault at all, but you lose that. And what are you doing? No, you're bringing in South Dakota, you're bringing in New Hampshire, you're bringing in, some directional school from the MEAC or something. And then your quality non-conference games outside Iowa State are in, Quad Cities, Sioux City, Kansas City. What are you giving your fans here? You're not giving them any reason to get interested. You're just saying, we have a basketball. We're the Hawks. Go Hawks. Come and support us. And people are like, I got stuff to do. It's a different era. It's not the 70s, 80s, 90s. I mean, there are a lot of people who would rather sit on their couch with their cell phone in their hand for 4 hours than do anything I don't want to go there. I don't feel like.
The home viewing experience has improved greatly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. You look at TVs and, all the streamings, every damn game is on. You can find any game you want on TV now.
Exactly. But I have BTN Plus, and I use it for a lot of things, but you have the opportunity to check out all these games. And so,
but if you met players in the summer at PTL or at a barnstorming up in Northwest Iowa, maybe you're more motivated to go check out the team instead of watching it from your couch.
Exactly. If you're bringing your kids and you're in Sioux City and they decide, you know what, we're going to fly the team up to Sioux City and we're going to sign autographs. We're going to have a workout. We're going to have, go Hawks and maybe some former players show up and kind of have a celebration and 2,000 fans show up, let's say. But you're with your kids and you bring them in and you get an autograph and maybe Peyton Sanford hands them a basketball. You take a picture of them smiling. Hey, dribble like this. That builds connections. Then that little boy or that little girl looks and goes, wow, he's on TV. I met him. And how many people do we know, and it could be anybody, remember when you were at 8 years old and you met a famous person, an athlete or whatever, and it still sticks in your mind 40 years later, 60 years later. Those are relationships you build. And it's a relationship with the brand and it's a relationship with the athlete. And when you remove all of that and you don't give them anything, you're not giving them any attachment. And I think that's been part of the problem here is, Fran has done that. He wants to coach basketball. Okay. But the athletic department has to build the bonds, because Fran could coach in an empty arena. Basketball's basketball, but you got to fill it. Well, how do you fill it? And that's Gary Bard is saying, okay, Fran, that's fine. We want to eliminate the PTL. We're allowed to do that. We have new workout policies and stuff, but we got to replace it with something else. And that may mean you guys take a bus down to Burlington and go to Burlington High School on a Wednesday night in June. And you got to do that. That's going to just be part of what you're doing, because they don't even do a TV show anymore. So, it's just, and then, then there's that. So I think, that's where, to me, athletic department hasn't had any good ideas. Basketball program has just done its own thing kind of in the background. And then you can still make up for all of that if you win at a high level, which they're not doing. So I don't know. I'm very, very windy on this. So I'm much more interested in your opinion than mine now.
No, I think, we've discussed this a lot through the years. Obviously, I referenced a radio show from 2 decades ago when us talking about this. So, for me, I'm kind of in a way, to a degree, I would say stumped on this, Scott. From a merit standpoint, I don't think Fran deserves to be let go. I think if you look what he's done comparative to the history of this program, NCAA appearances in a row and success and all Big Ten players and putting guys in the pros, all stuff that you want from your program. I think he's been successful at. He has shortcomings, and that is interactions with fans. And when you take a lot of what they've taken away, the only I want to say the only, but I think people tend to look at you for how they perceive you. And Fran is perceived by his sideline behavior, which has calmed through the years and gotten better, and he deserves credit for that. But he formed, Fran's red face and Fran is mad and all those things. And when you don't win and you have that aura about you, it's harder for people to support you and engage in you, right or wrong.
Mm.
And um, because I've had times where I've sat with Fran on AAU events and things like that in the stands, and he's very engaging. He's fun to be around when he lets his hair down, so to speak. And I think he's missed opportunities to engage his fan base and let them in to see who he really is. And they see him how other fan bases often view him, which is the red faced Fran and angry. Now, this is a business. And I've always said this in regards to Iowa football. If you're putting asses in the seats and people are supporting your program and you're making revenue, the people calling for Kirk Ferentz's job and wanting a coaching change kind of falls on deaf ears. It lets you know that that faction of the fan base isn't the one showing up at Kinnick or buying merch and all that stuff and supporting the program or putting money into the collective and supporting it that way. There's support for Iowa football. So even though there was an 8-5 year this year, it was disappointing based on preseason expectations. There really isn't, to me, any, for the people calling for Kirk Ferentz's job right now, and there are people out there, there's just, to me, that's just nonsense because there's no traction there.
Mm.
With men's basketball, there's an issue. There aren't people coming to the games. So whether it's Beth or the donors or the president or Fran, you got to figure it out. You can't keep going like this. So what does it take? Do you change the coach? And when you do so, how attractive is your job?
Mm.
How much can you improve where you are? Yeah, you could put people in, oh, we're excited because we hired the coach of the year in Todd Licklider, and we're going to come back and support the team because he's not Steve Alford, right? And that happened. There was a rally. You remember the rally?
Yep.
People came out, new coach, Todd Licklider.
Yep.
So just replacing Fran is not the answer here.
Mm-hmm.
Replacing Fran might not be the answer here because you could certainly end up with another Todd Licklider.
Yeah.
And again, how attractive is this job when you consider NIL, the current fan base, the support for the fan base, and you can blame it on whatever. Mm-hmm. It's Fran's fault. It's the late starts. It's the nights of the week. We go down the litany of reasons we've gone through for years, Scott. As you said, when you started your dissertation that led into my current dissertation on this, it's all stuff we've talked about for decades. Mm-hmm. It's not just the coach, people. And what we talked about 20 years ago, 25 years ago at the end of Tom Davis, declining attendance, not making advancing far enough in the NCAA tournament. We're still in the same place. Mm-hmm. It's big. It needs to be more than just changing the coach here. That's the low-hanging fruit for fans. Fire Fran.
Yeah.
Fran fatigue, all those things. Not the answer to fixing this problem.
Exactly. It's not changing the coach, it's changing the culture. And how do you change the culture? It really starts with the leader. It does, and as you said, the merit on the court, there are a lot of things we can mention about Fran that I think could tip the scales in his favor, which is one, since 2012, Iowa and Michigan State are the only two programs in the Big Ten to only have one losing season in conference. Everybody else has had more, like Indiana's had 5 or 6. Iowa has been steady at, you look at the tournaments, as you said, over the Tom Davis era, he's pretty much on par all those years. When you look at, player development, it's not the high end guys you're talking about. It's what are you doing with your 3 stars, like football? What are you doing with, Luka, it was probably more of a 4-star, but, the Murrays, other players, and how did you develop them and turn them into good players? Aaron White, that's important too. And he's
And I
done
think
all
a
those
case
things.
can be made, like you're saying, just to your point right there. He's done more with less.
Yes.
Will the next person do more with less, or can you give them more to work with?
Yeah. And if you can, then why didn't you give Fran more to work with?
Exactly.
There's that discussion.
But then Fran, as we said, has his responsibility for not engaging the fan base.
Right. And that's something that it goes along with it. I mean, when you look at contracts and that a lot of times, and I have to pull it up to see the exact amount, but 40 to 50% of what you earn is based on your interactions off the floor. It's not just on court success. It's hey, you've got your TV show or your and so going to the radio show, which I haven't even listened to it in years, I'll be honest with you. I just don't. But that's just something. There's no TV show anymore. You've got
And
to,
those radio shows, there's a handful of people.
yeah,
It's the regulars, it's the people you already have. It's
right.
the people that are already all in.
Yeah. And they're going to be all in no matter what.
Yeah.
Hey, we're here to support you, blah, blah, blah. And if there's 15 to 20 people there, but and then there's all kinds of stuff. And I don't know if I'll, substantiate any of the dealings when watching high school games and what gets said and what gets yelled and all that, but that doesn't build goodwill either. It's just, I just don't see a path that if you want to change the culture, if you want to change the environment, you're gonna have to probably start at the top. To even though and he's bringing in good players. Obviously you could talk about the newest recruit and the one that came from Miami in the transfer portal. They're bringing in good players, but does it matter when you can't get a third of your arena filled? I mean, again, being there on Tuesday night, I was watching the game.
Do you know how many tickets they've sold
for the season or for?
Because
it was 8,000 the other day.
Okay.
Tickets sold was the attendance announced was 8,000. There was not.
So they've sold 8. So it's important. I just wanted to let people know that if there's 2,000 or 3,000 people in the arena, that doesn't mean that's the tickets they've sold.
Right.
Because there's some people that are thinking that that's the case.
Yeah.
So Iowa is selling out about half of the arena right now, which still isn't good.
Yeah. And how much of that is, there weren't a lot of students.
Nope.
And there are reasons, and then there are factors, and then there are excuses. And I always look at it when fans provide what could be considered excuses. It's their wallet. It's their decision. I'm not going to tell people how to spend their money, whether it's to support their program or not. But I also say be prepared for the consequences. So if it's an 8:00 game, it's in the middle of the week, it's really, really, really cold outside, I just didn't feel like going. Hey, I understand that. But if that gets you to 4,900 fans in the arena, which is probably my guess, then it's a bad look. And then we have conversations like this.
And competitively.
Yeah.
It's a 2-point game.
Yeah.
With 4 minutes to go, and you don't have anybody in the arena to push you through.
Exactly. You're not having a home court advantage. And it's been this way for a little while now. It hasn't built itself up since COVID. There have been certain games, certain inflection points, but not across the board. But I've always, and then there's always the faction and going to your, another point of fan interest or wanting change. We've always had the discussion that the only way you can really make this happen at Iowa is to vote with your pocketbook, which is, I'm just not going to go, and then you have the arena empty, and you have concern from the administrators that are, or even, go to the Iowa State game where there's probably like what, 12,000 people showed up, but 3,000 were Cyclone fans. You have 3,000 empty seats for the in-state rivalry that always sells out. And then, another 3,000 or 2,500 probably goes to the Cyclones. That's not a good look either. And okay, then what are you doing to engage people? What are you doing to bring people in? Are you advertising anywhere that people can see? No. Are you having your players do anything other than, individual NIL stuff or, hey, I'm going to be at the burrito factory this week, or, no, you're not doing anything. You're not doing anything. And it's like, okay, your investment isn't real high right now as a program. And, you can look at Fran, and yes, he's certainly calmed down on his sideline demeanor over the years, probably just because of the change of clothes. Maybe the tie was too tight or something like that. Now he's more relaxed there or whatever, or which is the impression that a lot of people think he doesn't give a shit anymore. That he's tired of it. He doesn't care. It's like, well, they don't care. I'm not going to care. I'm just here to coach the team. And that's the only people I care about because everybody's mean to me. Okay. And the administration, what are they doing? Crickets. Okay, well, we're going to have a golf shot, in the middle of the game. So to me, it's institutional. It's a major issue. The question is, how do you solve it? And then the play on the floor, Rob, can elevate it all. If you're good, people will come. There's no doubt about it. And then when you go and you're losing 3 straight and you give up 116 points at Wisconsin, you come back and beat the hell out of Indiana, which probably would have changed some minds had you then gone to the West Coast and played well. But the USC game, that's the microcosm of the bad side of the Fran era, which is get way down, use your awesome offense to come all the way back, and then you can't get a stop because you just aren't built that way. And then play so flat where you're down 30 at UCLA. Then you come back home, and yeah, the fans have tapped out, but then you lose to a bad Minnesota team that you haven't lost to at home in 10 years. Good luck. Now you're playing Penn State on a Friday night. Penn State doesn't get the crowd. They're a pretty decent team, but they're not going to get the crowd in here. So you're going to play again for maybe it will be half full tonight because it's Friday. But I don't know, Rob. I mean, Fran may not deserve it based on what's gone on the floor. He is the all-time winningest coach. He's had success in the season. They've been a competitive program and everybody recognizes it. But in order to change the culture, you got to usually change the guy at the top, and it doesn't matter where it is.
Think about this. If you're looking for a commentary on Iowa men's basketball and where the culture is, where it stands in the last quarter century, if you let Fran go, if you decide business-wise, maybe merit-wise, he's not deserved to be let go, but it's unsustainable to have an empty arena. We're losing money by not being able to sell tickets. The program is falling farther down and going the wrong direction. Mm-hmm. You will have fired the last 2 guys who were your winningest coach. Mm-hmm. That's not good.
Yeah.
That's not what you're looking for. And again, my belief is that I do not think Fran's work on the floor, what he's done with his resources, merits him being fired. However, going back to what I said about football, you're filling Kinnick Stadium, you're making money. There are people that bitch because people bitch, obviously. So we don't know how to quantify how much that is. You have a head coach that's been here for a quarter of a century, so he's going to his critic base is going to just continue to grow as the years go. It's just human nature. But even if you compare what Kirk and Fran have done from a on the field, on the court standpoint, I think it's comparable considering resources and things like that. It's a bottom line business. And we talked at the front of this about NIL and the house settlement and all the money that's coming in. It is a business. It's always been a business, but now it's right in our face.
Mhm.
You can't continue with this. And again, I don't know what the conversations have been like with Beth and Fran, but hopefully there's conversations, because I can't see how you're looking at this and not seeing that it needs to be addressed now
Mhm.
in the season. What's going on? What do we, what can, because this isn't new. This has been going on for years, and it's going the wrong way. And you can't just keep rolling like this,
Yeah.
Scott. Something needs to be done. And if you feel like the path forward here is with the current coach, you cannot get the fans back. That's a decision that Beth and the higher ups need to make. If that's the decision they come with and they want to pay Fran whatever it is, I think it's four. Is it 4.5 the buyout?
4.2.
4.2. So, and then you probably have to pay a buyout with you may have to pay a buyout for a coach you want to bring in, maybe somebody in like a town called Morgantown or something like that.
Yeah.
If that was your guy, he's got a buyout. So now you're going to have to you got a program that's not doing what you want it to do from a business perspective. Now you've got to push a whole bunch of money into begin to fix it. Then what are you going to do in regards to what Scott and I have talked about for years and years and years, and what we talked about on Good Call, what this program needs? You got to make the decision to go, again, it's a cliche, all in here to fix this. You can't go half-ass. You
Right.
can't leave it the way it is, fire the coach, bring another guy in, and expect different results.
You've got to make it the cool place to be. And that's the truth. You've got to make it fun. People are going out of obligation now. That's not fun. That's like, well, I probably should go. I probably should buy the season tickets. I love Iowa. I should probably support the team. But it's not with this joy of I get to go. I can't wait to be there. I'm having a good time when I'm there. It's because you have to go because you support it. And the optics are the optics. And I hate to bring this up, but you know, there when Patrick transfers to another school and his other son decides to go to another school, that's something that people are like, well, what's the deal here? And it looks like, even though it's totally understandable, I totally get it, the optics are the optics there. And that you're not fully invested, and that's something that just you gotta examine. And I agree that Fran, and I don't have much of a relationship with Fran, I'll just say that we used to. I don't as much anymore, so that's what it is. On the floor, competitive program, good program, not a great program. And you can make the case if you want Iowa to be a power program in the Big Ten, that you maybe need a better coach. I can understand that you need a coach that's more well-rounded, that maybe just being first in the league in offense and last in the league in defense by a considerable amount in field goal percentage, defense, and winning games and getting good stops, and that's what gets you to the Sweet 16. That Fran's not your guy. I could understand that if you replace him with somebody and you're going to invest all that money into it. But they're going to have to do that. And I guess the thing is, when you go there, we always made the joke about knitting lady. I wish I could see her because I'd write a story about her. But
She's knitting from her couch now. She's
yeah,
got a really nice TV.
yeah,
She just has it on in the background. She's not really paying attention to
exactly,
it.
exactly.
Her husband's next to her on the couch reading a book.
No, he's like, he's snoring at 8 o'clock at night because the start time's too late.
Hat's curled up.
Yeah, as we know, Iowa fans are kind of chronic complainers about anything,
And I think that's most fan bases.
yeah. And here it's things like weather are a bigger
Yeah.
deal than they are at other places. And I always said that the confluence of so many things in Licklider's first year was as impactful in some ways as what happened with Pierre Pierce, because you had a new coach with nobody really returning, a new team that wasn't real competitive. He was a bore as a person. The team's style was boring. It was a bad weather year, and you had BTN starting, so you took all those games off KGAN, and people realized, you know what, they're not winning, they're not entertaining. I don't really care about the coach. There's no real good players.
And I need to
And
get out and get some Barbasol.
yeah, close shave America,
Rotel.
Rotel. Yeah.
We need a
Um,
shave and some Rotel.
yeah, I do need a shave, but but you have all those factors, and people learn that they can live without it. So it's like I was disgusted by Pierre Pierce. Now I'm not watching them on TV, and they're not any good anyway. Eh, and that's kind of, that's kind of where you're seeing this decline. And the problem is, you can for 5 years, you could survive with your fan base going down, but as long as the last 15, you've got fans to replenish it, donors, new graduates, that are excited. But Rob, I haven't seen that excitement, not with like the women's team, which is the exuberance of the women's team with little girls hanging, and this is Caitlin, but it's also now, also with Lucy Olson and Hannah Stolke and players like that little girls are hanging over the edge, wanting to get that autograph, wanting to meet them. You don't get that with the men's team anymore. And so, where do you the trajectory of this team to me, Rob, is probably NIT at best. You don't lose at home to Minnesota and look at the rest of their schedule and think, this gives me a lot of confidence that they're going to turn this thing around and get to 10-10 in the Big Ten and get into the tournament. I think I look at them and I say they're probably on the same type of track as last year, and it could be worse.
Who has a better chance to make the tournament, the men or the women?
I don't know. I think the women do, even though they'll have a losing record because the league is so deep and their net is really high.
It's interesting because I asked you the question last week. I don't know if you remember this, and you said the men, but I think that illustrates that we have two teams in town this year that are firmly on the bubble.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it depends on which day or week you ask. We could be barreling towards an NIT doubleheader at Carver Hawkeye Arena with the men and women.
Oh, no.
We've got Valparaiso against the Iowa men. And who can we get? Southwest. Oh, it's just Missouri State now.
Yes,
right?
Missouri
We'll have
State.
Missouri State for the women.
Yeah.
Come on down, Carver Cones.
I'll say this though. Last week was before the UCLA debacle.
Yeah.
And I mean, I wasn't surprised that they lost 2 on the road out west. I mean, it's
no,
tough.
the surprise was Tuesday night against Minnesota.
Yeah.
I mean, the losing on the road in this league is not a surprise. It's happening. There's we've seen it, but the loss at Minnesota was inexcusable. Against Minnesota was inexcusable.
Yeah. And Fran was all about the refs, and then he tried to make a joke, but I think it fell flat when he was talking about, well, if you're going to start a GoFundMe, then I'll talk. Now, come on, you
got to adjust, man. You've been in this league long enough. You have to adjust to how games are officiated.
Yeah, I mean, Minnesota's not that good.
No.
You're not talking about you're playing Michigan State, and they're winning the league, and it's a 3-point game, and your guy's getting mugged all the time, and then maybe there's some weight to your comments because Lord knows in that one Big Ten tournament quarterfinal at Chicago, when they got destroyed by Teddy V. I'm all in on that one. That one I saw it right there. I can see the anger, and they deserve it. But that wasn't one. From what I watched, and I wasn't in on every play because I was also paying attention to some other games, but I didn't see anything that made me go, wow, they're really bad out here. It's not like they're protecting Patrick Mahomes, playoffs.
And they're just, Iowa didn't have energy at the start of that game. Just looked flat as hell. Coming off 2 ass kickings on the road, you get a rival at home. There's no excuse for that.
Yeah. And if the arena was full, maybe they have energy, but you got to create your own energy too.
You played at Penn State.
Yeah, exactly.
which is kind of Iowa now. Iowa
Yeah,
reminds me of what used to be like going to the Bryce Jordan Center.
right. And this is what's sad to wrap up my thoughts on this is we go all the way back to the Tom Davis era. And when people ask me, well, don't make the same mistake we did with Tom Davis with Fran. I think you're there. Okay, the 20,000 foot view may look the same, but the peel back the layers are not. The difference is to me, there was not apathy in 1999, 1998. There was anger, there was vitriol, there was, hey, we got to do better than this. We can't let these guys leave the state. And then we have Collison and Heinrich, and they're leaving the state too, even though that was more after the fact.
Collison
That,
would have been here.
yeah, Collison would have been here, and Heinrich was going to go to Iowa State.
Yep.
So, voila. But then now it's about apathy. It's not about really the product on the floor. I mean, you're disappointed in it, but it's about the fans have checked out. and how do you get them back in? I think and this happens in the NFL too. This happens in pro sports where it's just you run your course. It's time to kind of part ways. Things aren't just and the one thing I will say though is if they do come to that conclusion that it's time to change the coach and the culture, I hope it can be phrased in a way where it's not a firing, and we could all say, well, it's firing. We pushed him out. But if it's, a retirement, hey, I want to watch my, son coach. I want to watch my son play. I want to do this, be closer to my family, blah, blah, blah. So then that way, because Fran doesn't necessarily deserve the firing, but the program deserves a change, if you get what I mean there.
I'm with you, and that's kind of we're on the same page here. What's going on is not sustainable. You can't have an empty arena. You just can't. It's a business. Basketball is one of your revenue sports. You have to make money there, and we spent the first 25 minutes to half an hour talking about needing money. More money now for your student athletes and NIL and support for your programs. This is a program with very little support right now. That has to be fixed. And I don't know, again, I don't want to be super repetitive here. I think we're on the same page in terms of Fran has done an admirable job with the resources he's been given. I'm not sure a lot of coaches would have been able to do what he did. Alford didn't have as much success. Licklider obviously was a disaster. So changing him doesn't change. Moving on from Fran is not a tonic for fixing this. That's kind of the theme that I think Scott and I share here. The path forward, you guys can decide. Obviously, you're making a decision. Those not going to games are making a decision and making a statement. And now it's up to Beth. She knew when she was hired, she was going to have some big tasks ahead of her. And the Carver Hawkeye Arena one is maybe bigger than any other one that she has. She's hired a new women's basketball coach. We'll see where that's going. Fire Jan crowd is insane.
Yeah. Right.
That is not even worth really a discussion. But she's going to have to replace her football and men's basketball coaches here with probably within the next 5 years, definitely.
Yeah.
And that pretty much is going to determine, whether or not she was a success moving forward. Huge hires. Those are your two big sports.
You are graded as an athletic director. You are graded by your hires. There's just no other way. You could say, hey, I built a new Carver Hawkeye Arena on the west side or downtown or whatever. That doesn't matter. None of it matters except for how your coach.
I added 2 extra Carver cone machines to Carver Hawkeye Arena.
Didn't you see that we got more bathrooms on the floor? We got, none of that is relevant. It's all about how your coaches perform for you. And
you want to stay away from lawsuits too. That's a good idea. As an AD, you want to kind of stay away from lawsuits and litigation.
Yeah, and avoid labels like racist and
Yeah.
sexist and
Yeah.
homophobic and all that kind of stuff. But that's a different avenue altogether. But no, and to Gary's credit, let's say about the coaching situations, that he wasn't knee jerk, and it's very easy to be that way. I want my own guy in. So when
Yep.
after, he comes in and Kirk has a bump in the road for a couple of years, that you could have said, well, it's time to move on. And, or Lisa for a long time, people don't remember this. Lisa's program was pretty stagnant too.
Yep.
That they were in that same kind of get to the tournament and not really do much there. But he stayed with both of them, and it really paid off. And he stayed with Fran for a while, and things didn't work out, or had some bumps too. And so there is some, you should get points for patience in some ways. Tom Brands even, but I think it's the same token. We know that when your coaches have reaching this point of 65 for your men's coach, 70 for your football coach this fall, the end is closer than the beginning on these. And I'm sure she's got ideas on where she wants to go. But if Kirk retires after this season, you better have a good idea on who you want to get. You better get the person, because that's going to determine everything. Because as much as we've talked all about basketball, it is so much easier to flip the switch in basketball than it is in football if you go down.
The only difference here is in this situation, and we've talked about it, Scott, is your football program's healthy.
Yeah,
You're going to attract some really good candidates for that job.
of course.
I question what you're going to be able to attract for the men's basketball job right now as things currently stand.
Yeah, it's true, but then it's also, hey, a $4.5 million check will ease some concerns there. And it's like, and because we're going NIL in house, this is how much money you're going to have for NIL. That can change a lot of things. And it's like, okay, well, what are you going to do for the exterior? That's the question to me, because if you've got a coach, Darren DeVries, let's just throw his name out there, and he's like, why would I leave West Virginia for Iowa? And he's like, on the personal side, absolutely. It's home. All my family's there. I've dreamed of this job, all that. But what about the infrastructure? How are you going to help me win? It's a very competitively, just like the Big 12 is.
When you think about West Virginia, John Beeline,
Yeah.
Bob
Bob
Huggins, I
Huggins.
know is off the court but he's a good coach. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah. Yeah.
you talk about their coaching lineage compared to what obviously the recent Iowa hires, and it's in a better shape basketball wise.
Yeah, sure is. Uh, and so you've got to be able to provide a vision for what you want to see differently. And Beth inherited Fran, and Fran, I don't think is going to change much about who he is or what he does, because he doesn't have to. But the next coach, you can say, this is what we're thinking and expecting, and this is what we're going to do differently. And so you can provide that. But really the thought is, if you make a bad hire in football, it will cripple your program like nothing else, because it's the biggest sport nationally, in college athletics. And if you
getting bigger
yes,
and growing.
Right. I mean, when an 8-5 season is not only a letdown, but you're you're kind of lingering there. If you turn into Purdue,
Yeah.
I mean, I wrote about them this fall and how they went from being a divisional champion and an exciting team, a lot like under Brom. They were a lot like Fran.
Yeah.
Offense first, exciting style of football, but couldn't win really anything of measure. And then they basically was a tiebreaker that they win the division title. But, and then you leave and then you just hire the wrong person. That really, they're in trouble. And then with a portal, it's a help, but it can kill you too, because players will leave.
And Bielema is like Newt Rockne now at Illinois after all their bad hires.
Mm-hmm.
And he's done well.
Yeah.
But it's not like they're, national championship contender or something like that. He just got them back to, respectability, and he has a chance to take them above that.
Yeah. I mean, they're 11-3, or they were 10-3 this year.
Yeah.
They won the Citrus Bowl. They're feeling pretty good about their program. Next year's schedule is very manageable. They were able to convince a lot of players to come back. And I think a lot of it, I think there's a lot of promises being made based on the House settlement that, okay,
Imagine that.
yeah. So I think that's everywhere
Yeah.
you're getting money now from the collective, and then the back half will come from the school. It's going to be it's going to bear watching, but all things told, if I put on a Nostradamus hat on things, I I'd be surprised if Fran's here, at the end of
After
the
this season,
yeah. I just would.
I don't have a feel for it. I mean, you hear things, I hear things on the street, and you're wondering, and sometimes they're conflicting things, and
Yeah.
you're like, I don't know. But I, I just go back to, what we've said along here. You can't keep going like this. I think um, it's been magnified.
Yeah.
Tuesday night was a clear magnification of the problem. Not only what happened on the court, but what's going on in the stands and the lack of interest and apathy and all those things. It's not going to fix itself, right?
No.
Something needs to be done.
Yeah. And again, you want to change the culture, you have to change the coach. You can't just say, hey, we want to do things differently and we're going to do all of this to help support you. That's what you've tried to do in the past or whatever, or didn't do in the past. But, this stage, would he be receptive to it? Would he do things differently? I don't know. I just think that's probably a clean break is probably the best for everybody. I'm not saying, I'm not in Fran's head. I don't go to his press conferences anymore or anything, but watching them, I don't see a lot of rah rah, it's just goomba. And and then again with football, yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if you're looking at a hire in a year or two, certainly in the next 3 to 4, I would
Yep.
think. And so you're remaking the program, and how you do it matters, and Jan, people need to get off her back. It's a tough situation right now. And I understand, I have questions too, but, and I think probably where her inexperience is showing is when the player you bring in, and Lucy Olson, she played awesome the other day at Washington, but she struggled in other games, and you expect more from your player. Expect her to be the leader, not go 1 for 6 from the free throw line in the final stanza, and do better from the field. And then you're grasping at straws, because you're trying to find an answer. Can anybody make a free throw in the final 5 minutes of the game? Can anybody do better than 0 for 7 from the field and in crunch time? That's where it's understandable for her. And how does she get everybody out of a funk? The Nebraska game at the very end, when you have an open look at the basket and your guard misses the layup, that's good coaching. That's not good execution. So
During the 5-game losing streak, they lost by an average of 4.8 points. Lost to Maryland by 8, Illinois by 5, Indiana by 7, Nebraska by 3, and Oregon by 1. They're right there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Those are going the other way. Tough schedule. Those are tough teams for the most part that they played. So, yeah, I think it's, I don't know. I think they've made it, Scott. I think the Iowa women's basketball team has made it because now they've got haters and critics.
Right.
And people care when they're ready to fire the head coach.
Yeah. All right. Exactly. There'd only be a few that all those years on Good Call with Brent, there'd only be a few that maybe would call in about Lisa, but and of course Brent was doing the games then.
Yeah.
So pretty strong in her favor. But yeah, that irritates me anyway, because it just, come on, give them a chance. I looked at this year as you had 3 pillars that you needed to build around, and that included the role players improving their roles and the freshmen growing, symbiotically. And that's Sydney Falter, Hannah Stolke, and Lucy Olson. And they've all been either hurt or in a massive slump at times. And, and serious concussion for Hannah Stolke. She's still struggling with it. Um, Sydney Falter is, exactly who she was. She's playing exactly the same way. She's a junkyard dog. She's getting rebounds. She's not necessarily a big scorer. She can score at times, and Lucy, the other day we saw the best of her, no question. And early in the year she was really good. She hit that slump. I think she just needs to be looser, loose Lucy, and then when those three play well, then the other players can fill their roles, increase them a little bit. Kylie Feuerbach, when Lucy's playing well, she's playing well. Addie O'Grady gives her open looks under the basket. Then the freshmen come in and play really well. And then it's like you see a team that's competitive. But when Hannah's hurt and Lucy's not playing well, then you have to fill that vacuum with something. And that's where they're struggling.
Yeah, no doubt. And you knew there'd be growing pains. This is a team capable of getting hot and running off some wins here and making a push. I do think that the men's team, much more inconsistent, I think, just with not wins and losses, but play from game to game. And that's harder to figure out, but not impossible. And likely going to need to do it in front of small crowds, but they kind of been used to that the last few years. And, tonight is Penn State. And, I don't want to think about if they lose tonight's game, what the reaction will be. The women are off until Tuesday night, coming back from out west. That will play host to Northwestern Tuesday night, 7:00, and that's on the Big Ten Network. Tangela Smith, Northwestern assistant, former Hawkeye, gets to come home, and she'll get to see Randy Peterson, who's an assistant for Iowa, and I believe they were teammates for 1 year back in the late 90s. So kind of cool Hawkeye lineage there when it comes to women's basketball. So, all right, Scott, we didn't come to any resolutions with the Iowa men's basketball program, but I think we gave some good conversation here and insight into institutionally the knowledge that we have from years of doing this and kind of where things stand, and hopefully we made some sense for folks to where they are and can maybe think about this critically and the path forward. And I think everybody involved wants to see people back in Carver Hawkeye Arena, because when that place is full, man, it rocks. It really does. I know it gets a bad rap sometimes, but it is a fun arena when it's rocking.
All you have to do is watch what it's been like in women's basketball and wrestling. It's full. And when it's full there and it's full in men's basketball, it's good. And traveling the Big Ten, as long as I did, and I know you did too, when Carver is good, it's right up there with the best as far as environments go. Is it as cool as an Assembly Hall? No, but it can be as intimidating. It can be as loud. It needs a renovation, no question. But I think right now it's we just spent a lot of time talking about it, what ails the program. So.
And it's not up to us, Scott. It's up to the fans.
Yeah.
They decide these things with their wallets, with their money. They decide ultimately who stays and who goes. So it's up to you guys. And we'll be back here to talk about it and talk about the action on the court and the mats. The wrestling team, did I mention that? The wrestling team is home. Wrestling team is home. This is a good one. Ohio State, number 4 Ohio State, this Saturday, tomorrow, 1 p.m. Central Time. That's Big Ten Network. So big match big duel for the Iowa wrestling team as we start to get going into February and they start to get towards the important time of their season. So we'll talk more about that as we move forward, and more about men's basketball and football and all that stuff, women's basketball going forward. But we've exhausted this podcast, and we have to get on with our day and our weekend. So hopefully you guys do too, and hopefully you have a great weekend. And Scott and I will be back to talk to you next week. Thanks to the sponsors. Be well, folks. Have a great weekend. Say goodbye, Scott.